Hey, this is Anney.
And Samantha.
And welcome to Stuff I've Never Told You, a production of iHeartRadio. And it is time for another happy hour. Do you know what number happy hour this is, Samantha?
I do not.
66.
Oh, no.
That's why we're talking about some Star Wars stuff today.
Of course.
I mean, like, not that I need a reason. We're going to touch on like bigger topics, I promise. I promise this time. But the impetus was because of Order 66 from Star Wars. And I was like, well, now I have to talk about something related to that.
There you go.
Yes. As always, if you're drinking, please do so responsibly. What are you sipping on, Samantha?
So I am a little bit under the weather. So with that being said, I was trying to make some tea, but my kettle was not going fast enough.
Aww.
So I am drinking bubble water.
Bubble water's nice.
Bubbly.
I was trying to look into some new flavors just a couple days ago. So
okay.
You can do a lot of experimentation with it, for sure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I love the bubbly flavors. Bubbly.
Mm-hmm.
Bubbly. This, again, not sponsored, even though I'm struggling with the name, obviously, flavors. But my favorite has become pineapple is at top, strawberries right underneath that, and then blackberry is below that. But like then I've tried several others, but there's a few I haven't tried, which I probably should. I haven't tried. I think there's a mango one. I can't remember. I probably need to look into that. But outside of that, I am now drinking pineapple bubbly water.
Nice. That sounds like refreshing. Hopefully it'll help you out.
Like I'm hoping that this can be enough to like, you're supposed to get a lot of water and liquid. So
Yes. Well, definitely hope you feel better because it's been a long time. I'm always like,
it lingers.
Sucks. It lingers. I am drinking my box red wine still because I have yet to really go and buy stuff. I did visit my mom for Easter, and she sent me home with so much food.
Yeah.
It was very sweet, but I was like, wait, what? Because she just kind of showed up and she had these 2 huge bags.
Amazing.
Like I'm a single person, and a lot of this is like fresh food.
Gotta eat it.
So because of that, I haven't been to the store in a hot minute because I was like, well, now I have all this food and there's no need to go to the store.
Fair.
But yes, sticking to my box red wine. Okay, so for this episode, it's not an unhappy hour, although I'm afraid, knowing us, it could verge into that territory.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like, I think we might get to talking and it might become something of an unhappy hour. I will say, like, content warning, I don't think we're going to get too in depth with it, but we are going to be talking about kind of feeling like you have to monitor other people's mental states, or like you're responsible for their mental states. And I know that can be triggering for people.
Right.
So just to put that out there. And I think we are probably going to talk about rape culture briefly. So put that out there. I guess I should say, I mean, we are starting with an unhappy Star Wars tie-in, which of course I had to have one. Order 66, of course, is the order that Emperor Palpatine issued that resulted in the death of most of the Jedi.
Right.
And it is a very heartbreaking scene. And it's especially like if you've watched the Clone Wars show and sort of seen the effects and how it all played out, it's really heartbreaking. But the reason, like, of course I had to do it because it's the 66 happy hour, but the reason that relates to mental states and intuition, which is something we're going to talk about too, is a lot of people, when they find out a lot of my favorite characters are Jedi and they want to like really annoy me, they'll say, well, if they were so good, they should have sent Order 66. Like, it's on them. They're too stupid to survive or whatever. There's a whole host of reasons that's wrong. I'm not going to go into them because, as I said, I am only mentioning Star Wars today. But but kind of this whole idea that I think has been weaponized against women of intuition. Because, we hear about women's intuition. They're more intuitive, which I think this relates to the episode, the discussion we had around suspicion and women. Whereas my opinion is a lot of that, I think, is just women existing in the world and having to figure out how to exist in the world and how to pick up on these dangers that are in their life. And that maybe that can look like intuition. Would you describe yourself as an intuitive person? Has that been something people have called you?
Yeah, typically. I think it's kind of the trait of, if I did have reactive attachment disorder at one point in time, and kind of that mentality is you watch people and therefore you gather and get senses of people. And typically, I'm typically on. One experience recently is currently in my personal life with like buying a house. It was pretty on. Surprisingly, my intuition is very like, if I remain calm and if I'm not over one emotion or the other, that tells me something about whatever that situation is. But yeah, I have been, typically I'll get a lot. Like, that's why I was a good investigator for defects, because I was able to follow and know what was happening and see the deeper. And I would have bosses bring me aside and be like, okay, you were right. How did you know? So I definitely would say, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense, especially for people who have gone through trauma, is that it's sort of necessary. Like, you have to be hyper aware and pick up these signs. And it reminds me of the episode I did forever ago before I had you, Samantha, with Lauren, where we were talking about, like, why didn't you believe her? And that whole trope in horror movies where women are like, hey, I think we should go.
Right.
The men are like, let's go.
It'll be fine. And then everybody dies.
And I to me, that makes sense. But as with so many things that we gender and assign to women, I feel like it's been turned and used and weaponized against us, where like, if we're wrong, or not even if we're wrong, because sometimes you're in a situation and you feel like you have to be polite or you don't want to be rude, even though like something inside you is screaming like, this is a bad situation. That if we didn't act on our presumed intuition that all women must have, that's on you. That's your fault. You should have had your intuition. I don't know why you didn't get out of that situation.
Right. Or if you do follow through and nothing happens, you're being paranoid.
Exactly. You cannot win. And that just really infuriates me. It's like, it's one of those things where it gets praised. It's like, oh, women and their great intuition, which it is not scientifically backed up. It's just not like a gendered thing that's been backed up, but that is our societal conversation around it. I do think that because of the way our culture is, that women are picking up on more signs, but that's not like a scientific, like, known thing.
Right.
Right. So we praise it, but it's almost like we're expecting women to have this like supernatural sense of danger this way, or I promised I wouldn't make it into more Star Wars stuff, but like a whole government plot is out to kill you.
Well, I mean, also, we did talk about it when we talked about, are women more superstitious? And we talked about intuition and magical thinking and all of these ideas. And it is placed on women, but it is also either infantilized on women. So you're being a child, you're living in a dream world, or you are paranoid, or you just believe in magic, or any of those levels, instead of being seen as seriously. And in actuality, it's not necessarily, intuition is not necessarily a magical feeling. I talk about feelings, but you read signs and you find contentment and you find ways that either you resolve yourself to that point and or understand that there's something bigger here. And so you need to make a decision, and it may be a life impacting decision. And for women, they are more likely to be in danger if they don't look at that. And it's more thought out and fleshed out than people assume.
Yeah, that's another thing that really bothers me, is that whole idea. We're so ready to be like, oh, you're being emotional.
Right.
So yeah, if you're like feeling this thing and have it just dismissed, but then on the flip side, oh, you didn't act on it. That's on you. It's always your fault as the woman in this situation, no matter what. It is some like emotional thing that is good if only if it doesn't impact like anyone else. And if you're the only woman in the situation and you're put in danger, it's on you. That's your fault. Because you should have known better.
How did you get there? What did you do? What did you say? Yeah, I think it's interesting. But yeah, intuition is also, I guess, in some cultures, actually respected and revered at one point in time. And I know generations of the matriarch and believing that was a thing. And I'm sad that we don't have that as much because, there's a lot of wisdom from the matriarch that we should understand if we truly allow for all openness and all understanding instead of just the patriarchal idea that's placed on what a matriarch should be.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I feel like this is just another instance of really dismissing anything that's associated with women.
Right.
And calling it silly until they like to blame you about it.
Then you weren't adult enough.
Exactly. And so part of this, as I mentioned, something else I was thinking about is this idea of feeling responsible for the mental health of others at the detriment to yourself, especially for women and marginalized folks. And one of the reasons I was thinking about that is because I feel like in a lot of these situations, in my experience at least, where maybe you do have that kind of like blaring, I'm not safe, or something's telling me something's wrong here. You feel like a responsibility to the other person in this scenario to keep, like, for their mental health, and you're worried about them. And so you kind of do ignore maybe these feelings you're having and this intuitive feeling you're having for the safety of another person or for the mental health of another person. And I think a lot of women do that because we've been kind of socialized to be that way, to be caring.
Sacrifice yourself at all costs. And then, there's also that level of taking on, if you did see signs, so people who have lost people who have died by suicide take on a lot of blame for themselves for, say, the aftermath, going back into, this is what this was. And I think it's a really heavily upon a lot of women, those who identify as females, and those even in the marginalized communities, because they were like, I've had those feelings, I've had these moments, I should have seen it for them. And that's another added layer of like feeling guilty because you didn't take it on yourself, and not realizing, you can't control another person's actions no matter what, no matter how similar your situations may be, no matter how close you were. There's nothing truly that you can do to change that situation. Like, you may think there is, and there's a whole kind of level of like reaching out and calling and doing what you can, but there are some times where you just like, it's hurting both or all the above. And sometimes you miss things and you can't take it on themselves. And I hate that culture of, reach out because you never know who you're going to save. So it places a lot of responsibility onto other people that shouldn't necessarily be there, to be a lot of guilt on people. And then also see as if like, gives the people also savior complex, thinking that you did do something. Like it really, you have that control. There's so many layers to that I've been thinking through, like, what is this? Because there is, like, as a person who has worked in social work and advocacy, I've had a lot of guilt over deaths and children's deaths and parents' loss and other victims coming through because I didn't do enough. There's so many things that came, and that level of guilt almost, like my panic attacks revved up, and my health went down, my sleep went down. There's so much to that was so wearing, but of course it's a little different because it was my profession.
Yeah.
But it's so wearing, and it's so dangerous to have those conversations that have this, you must be a savior, which is a selfish thing in itself, but also saying it's your fault if you didn't save them.
Right. Yeah. And that's why I kind of paired these two together of like intuition and this idea of responsibility for other people's mental health, because I think they're related in terms of women are supposed to have higher emotional intelligence, be better with emotions, which again, there are societal reasons why that might largely be true, but it's not scientifically true. It's just sort of a thing that we've assigned. And I do think there are social conditioning things that make that like perhaps generally true, but it's not like a thing.
Right.
So as women, we're presumed to have this higher emotional intelligence. And I think that a lot of burden is getting placed on us in these situations where we're expected to know how to handle someone else's mental health, and we're expected to do it.
Right.
And if you don't, then you failed. It's on you that you didn't do the work, or you didn't fix this, in very heavy quotes, because you didn't see it, or you didn't do this emotional labor that we also assign to women to deal with it.
Right.
And I think it is a very toxic and exhausting and damaging situation that a lot of people are in.
So there's a whole joke about being empaths right now.
Mm-hmm.
Like everybody's an empath all of a sudden. And I'm like, and people are joking, I don't think you know what that means necessarily. Mm-hmm. And kind of like just flippantly saying what that is and not realizing, hey, this is a thing. This really is a thing. Yeah. But now that we've used this and turned it into a joke, it's no longer recognizable or seen as what it is. And it can be harmful for those who really have that heavy empathy that really can cause them emotional damage. There's also that level of those like caretakers who take on themselves to be the saviors. And we need to be careful of recognizing that as well. Be like, that's again, another whole conversation of like, hey, people really don't want that. They don't need necessarily a savior. They need someone, a companion, a friend, or whatever, a guidance. And yes, definitely, when you talk about the professional level, I'm like, okay, all of these things and separating it. But this whole level of savior complex has kind of has glossed over all of that. And it seems nice and cute, but at the same time, it's, again, performative. And we have to be careful on that too.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up. I'm glad you brought both those things up, because I do think we talked about this like during the pandemic. I don't think any of my friends would be upset to hear, but almost none of my friends are doing well, I would say. I'm not doing well either, so I'm putting myself in it. And I do take it on because I'm stressed. I love my friends and I want them to.
Right.
It stresses me that they're not doing well.
Right.
And we've talked about that. And I do think that's a part of this. And I want to add on here, like I'm talking about a couple of very specific family situations in my case. And one friend situation. But just in case you're listening to this, I think people can relate, but I am talking about something fairly specific in my case. Yeah. But I don't want to dismiss, again, I believe that there are reasons we have these kind of feelings and intuition, and I believe that has been weaponized. And I believe that for a lot of us, we feel a very intense pressure to take on the responsibility of other people's mental health, and even like not even mental health. Sometimes I could even say like happiness,
right?
And I think that is exhausting, and that's unhealthy for a lot of reasons. So it's just something I've been thinking about.
Yeah,
Rightly
so.
But this is definitely something that has come up for me a lot in therapy, where because of certain events in my past, I just struggle so hard with like upsetting people, and it's kind of a trigger for me. Like I'm nervous that I'm gonna broach something or not do something the right way when it comes to someone who's struggling with mental health or just struggling in general. So it's definitely a thing for me that I have to work on. All of this from a Star Wars pun I wanted to make. Well,
so excited.
Yes. Cheers.
Cheers.
Yes. I hope you feel better soon, Samantha.
Me too. I'm not feeling awful. It's just definitely a little under the weather.
Could be weather related, as we've discussed.
Yes, maybe.
As always, listeners, thank you so much for joining us for these happy hours. If you'd like to email us, you can. Our email is stephanie@momstuff@iheartmedia.com. You can find us on Instagram at Stuff I've Never Told You or on Twitter at Mom Stuff Podcast. Thanks as always to our super producer, Christina.
Thank you, Christina.
Yes. And thanks to you for listening. Stuff I've Never Told You is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.